His world was cameras, whispers, and doors that locked themselves. Mine was quiet vigilance and streetlight shadows. He hired me to keep him safe, never expecting the safest place would become my hands, my chest, my stubborn heart. I wore a suit, carried secrets, and learned to love at last. Subscribe and settle in. This gentle, heartfelt story will warm your evening. Like, comment, and share with someone who believes. I had been a bodyguard long enough to know that most of the work never made the movies. It was early mornings, careful routes, lists of names, lists of faces, lists of places where someone might lean too close. It was keeping my voice low on the phone, keeping my temper lower in the hallways, learning to memorize rooms from the threshold before my client ever stepped inside. It was knowing how to go unnoticed while being the alert presence that made everything feel still. I liked that kind of work. It gave me a place to hold steady. Before I met him, my days were quiet on purpose. His name was Daniel Mercer, and if you read the news, you might know it. He owned a group of health clinics in New England and had started a foundation after his sister passed away. He talked about addiction with a kind of plain, fierce kindness that made even cynical reporters lower their voices. He knew how to smile with his eyes and how to make a room of strangers believe in second chances. He was not a showboat. He wore dark suits with scuffed brown shoes because they were comfortable, and he laughed in the small ways that made other people breathe easier. At the time I met him, someone had been sending threatening letters. They were not the first he had ever gotten, but they were more specific this time. He did not want to be afraid, but the people who loved him wanted him alive. I met him in a quiet coffee shop near the Charles, when the light was soft through the windows, and the barista still had a sweater on. He was on time, which told me almost everything. Men in his position were usually 5 minutes late on purpose. Daniel arrived with a reusable cup and his jacket folded over his arm, hair a little wind-blown from the walk. He had those gray eyes that made you think of old granite steps warmed by sun. People glanced at him and then looked away, the way you look away from a photograph that knows too much. "Evan," he said, offering his hand. And I could tell he had been briefed because he used my first name and didn't add Mr. His hand was warm and steady. "Thanks for meeting me here. I thought we might as well save the fancy conference room for later." "Mr. Mercer," I said. "Daniel is fine," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in a way that made me mirror it. "I ordered you a black coffee and a blueberry muffin, which I will never stop believing is the right answer. If you take cream or a different pastry, I'll take my chances." "Black is perfect," I said. It was, and even if it hadn't been, the way he said it would have made it so. You want a client who makes small decisions and lets you make the hard ones. He got right to the point. "I know you handled protective detail overseas. You worked with a senator for a while. You left the agency a few years ago. People say you're careful, discreet, and that you like this city. People also say you're stubborn. They're right about the city," I said. "And the stubborn part keeps people alive." He smiled at that like he appreciated the honesty. "I've never had a full-time bodyguard," he admitted. "We've had security for events and the office has procedures, but I've always believed that being accessible is part of the work. I don't want to live behind glass." "You don't have to," I said. "But you do need someone thinking that way so you can think about the rest. That's what this work is. I look for glass and you look for people." He looked at me for a long moment, and if I had to name the way he looked, I would call it reckoning. He was weighing me against a future he had not wanted but knew he should plan for. He took a breath that made his shoulders set. "I got 3 letters in the last month," he said quietly. 2 emails came through a clinic account, and I've noticed a car. It might be nothing. It might be something. My lawyers want paper trails. The board wants responsibility. My mother wants tranquilizers and he said, and he made a little helpless gesture with his open palm. "Want to go to work and come home and go for a run without scanning every shadow." I didn't say I understood. I did not tell him that my childhood was long corridors of noise, and the Marine Corps gave me a language for the part of me that never learned to rest. I didn't tell him that sleeping with a shoulder against the wall had become a kindness to myself, or that quiet mornings in a kitchen felt like a privilege you earned by getting older and still being here. I just said, "We'll make a plan." I started the next week. I did a sweep of his home, which was an old brownstone that wore its age like a wool coat. The rooms had that light you only get near the river in Boston, clear and gentle even when it's cold. He had a kitchen table that could hold a family, and a piano he probably played when no one was there. Pictures of his sister sat on a shelf near the bookshelf, a curly-haired teenager with a stubborn chin and a grin that matched his. I paused and looked, then moved on. I'm meticulous when I work. I sit with the places and learn their hazards and their comforts. His schedule was full, but not showy. Clinics in Dorchester and Roxbury, a meeting at the State House, a luncheon with donors where the napkins were cloth, and you had to remember which fork mattered so you didn't reach for the wrong one and knock a glass. He ran most mornings early. He answered his own emails sometimes late at night. He went to a small diner with counter stools where the waitress called everyone honey. If there was an image to protect, he didn't care much for it. I liked that, and told myself that liking traits is not a problem when you're being paid to protect a person. It is actually useful. You watch better when you admire the life you are guarding. We developed a rhythm. I drove the car because you never want your client driving if someone else might have to make a fast decision. He sat passenger sometimes and sometimes in back. He asked about my favorite coffee, my favorite route, the best place to park near the clinic on a snow day. He listened in small ways that he probably didn't know mattered and that I tried not to mind too much. The car showed up again on the third day. It was a dark blue sedan with a dent in the rear fender and 3 stickers on the bumper that said nothing but looked like something. It kept 2 car lengths behind us, then 3, then turned when we turned. I saw it, noted the plates, kept us moving, didn't mention it to him until we were in the parking garage under the office and his hand was on the door handle. Hold, I said. He paused. What is it? Just wait 30 seconds, I said. I got out, shut his door, stood next to the car like a man checking a grocery list, scrolled my phone, and looked without turning my head. The blue sedan cruised past the entrance to our level, then went on, like it wasn't interested. I breathed out. Go ahead, I said, opening his door for him. Let's get you upstairs. I could feel him looking at me as we walked to the elevator. The quiet whir of the car rising, that soft heat of air that collects in underground places. You saw something, he said. I saw a car that has been in our shadow, I said, calm. It may be nothing. It is a little off. We'll adjust. Double back and see if it shows again. Make a note. It helps to assume it is nothing unless we know it is something, and to act as if it is something unless we know it is nothing. That feels like a life lesson, he said, and I heard the smile in it even though I was not looking at him. I didn't return it. I wanted to. But I don't joke when I am assessing threat. It keeps my head clear. That afternoon, he had a public panel. There was a dais and a thin microphone that made everyone's second chin look unfair in the camera. There were call-in questions, and a man stood up and spoke about his son in a voice that made the room sit forward like people who wanted to help. Daniel held his hands flat on the table and listened like the man was the only person in the world. That right there is charisma at its best, attention used like a blanket. I watched the doors. I watched the corners of the room. I watched the woman near the back who was too interested in a purse on the floor. We got through the panel and into the hallway where the air smelled like floor cleaner that never quite learned to be citrus. You need 5 minutes, I said. Then we go. He nodded, and then someone grabbed his arm in a way that made the hair on my neck rise. It was too fast, too tight, and the voice that said his name was a little too high. Mr. Mercer, the person said. I was between them without thinking about it. My hand on the person's wrist, not rough, firm. Give him space, I said. The person blinked at me, cheeks bright with some emotion that was not exactly anger. I just wanted, I know, Daniel said gently from behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder for a second. The lightest touch, permission, and promise all at once. What did you want to say? The person, young, mid-20s, swallowed, eyes shiny. You helped my brother, they said. He wouldn't take the help, but you made the offer with respect. You didn't shame him, I wanted to say thank you, and then I grabbed you like a fool. You're okay, Daniel said, his voice like a steady hand. What's your brother's name? He listened, he nodded, he remembered to breathe with the young person. My hand eased off the wrist slowly, and I saw Daniel feel that. felt his touch on my shoulder change with the information. Safe again. This is how you work together when one person knows how to stay calm from the heart and the other knows how to keep danger from hitting bone. We left a few minutes later. In the car, he seemed quiet, a different kind of quiet than when he was tired. The river ran alongside us, water like sheeted glass, my eyes on the mirrors, my hand loose on the wheel. He was looking out the window, jaw working the way you do when you are thinking about people and the ways they are hurting. He glanced at me, then away, then back. "Thank you," he said. "That's the job," I said. "I know," he said. He hesitated, then added, "I'm still learning how to let it be the job. Letting someone guard you is a kind of courage. Some men get it wrong and think it's weakness. Daniel got it right, even if he didn't like it." That night, after I checked the house and made sure the sensors were functioning and we had enough light in the right places, he offered me tea in the kitchen. "You don't have to drink it," he said. "You can leave. You can be as private as you need, but I make good tea." "I believe you," I said, surprising myself with the way my voice softened. We sat at his kitchen table. The wood had that smooth feel where hands have been for years. He said little things, the kind of small talk that lets your body catch up to your mind. He asked about my parents, and I said my mother lived in Florida near a cousin and sent me postcards of beaches she never sat on long enough. He told me he learned to cook late and now cooked like he had something to prove. He admitted he ran because running quieted his thoughts, and that sometimes he ran because he didn't know what else to do. I watched his mouth as he talked. I should not have, but I did. He had the kind of mouth that looked serious even when. He smiled, like he had known more than his share of grief, and had decided to keep the softness anyway. I wanted to keep looking. I did not. Discipline is a muscle. You strengthen it when it aches. By the end of the week, the blue sedan had shown up twice. We filed reports. We shared them with Boston PD. We adjusted routes. I added a second car when it made sense. I hired a man named Luis to join us on 2 days when Daniel had overlapping commitments. We would develop a team. In the beginning, I kept it lean because that's how Daniel would tolerate it. The threats by email got louder. Whoever it was had learned to cut and paste from articles and build a collage of imagined grievances. They weren't eloquent. They didn't have to be. Anger rarely needs polish. At the end of the month, there was a gala. I dislike galas. People think they are the easy days for security because everyone is dressed up and there is a valet line. They are, in fact, the hardest. You have people packed into rooms where they drink more than they eat, and they feel like they know the man you are protecting because they read an article, or his op-ed made them cry. There are cameras, and there are the ones you can see and the ones you cannot. There are donors who come close because they think they pay for the right. And there are journalists who come close because they think the public does. And there are those who come close because they want something else entirely. That night, it rained the steady rain that darkens every suit and makes every red carpet look like a long wound. We moved through it, Daniel under a black umbrella I held, his body beside mine like a current I could feel even when he did not speak. Inside, light fractured into gold and white. A string quartet played music that did not know the word trouble. The air was a mix of perfume and money. Daniel did the rounds like a man who had learned how, and then lost patience with it, and then learned again because it helped the clinic stay open. He was better at it than he thought, and the thing that made him good at it was that he kept his gratitude honest. Limousines outside, quiet rooms inside where he went and looked at charts and asked questions about intake because that is who he was when no one was looking. "Stay close," I said when someone I did not like came through the door. He was small and fast-eyed and wore a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel said, glancing at me like a man who knew there was something he wanted to say and had promised himself he would not say it now. He gave his speech, and for 15 minutes you could feel the room listen with its whole body. He talked about second chances and about the people who wouldn't get them without these clinics. And he talked about dignity like he had practiced it in his mirror and then forgotten to perform and just meant it instead. The applause was like rain, even and simple, and he stepped off the stage into me because that's where I was supposed to be. I felt his breath on my jaw and stepped aside and felt him missing that closeness a half second after I did. I would have ignored it if he had. He did not. "You keep showing up right where I need you," he said under his breath, not flirting. "Not exactly." "That's the job," I said again, and this time the words felt different because my chest felt different. I felt that like a weight and a lift, a quiet siren going in my own bones. Later, when the night had thinned and the room smelled like leftover champagne and wilting flowers, a fire alarm went off. I knew within 10 seconds it wasn't real. The sound had the pitch of a test and the rhythm of human hands. We moved quickly, but not panicked. I put a hand on his back and guided him toward a service staircase. Luis took the other side. A door opened too fast. I did not draw my weapon. I raised my hand and used my body the way you do when you want to block someone without starting something you cannot control. But the person in the doorway, thin, pale, wet hair plastered to his head like he had just come in from the rain, saw Daniel and made a sound like a word cracked down the middle. "You," he said, no breath under it. "Step back," I said. Daniel put his hand on my arm. "It's okay," he said. "I know him." He didn't, not exactly. He knew the type. He knew the hurt. He knew, I think, the look of a person who had followed a hope all the way up the hill and then didn't know where to put it. "Mr. Mercer," the man said, "you tell your people to refuse people like me. You say wait lists and you say funding cycles and you say sorry like a coin." "I hear you," Daniel said, his voice soft but with iron in the center. "What is your name?" "Anton," he said, and it came out like it hurt. "You don't get to say my name." "Anton," Daniel said again, with a different kind of saying. "Tonight isn't the place to talk. You are not safe here. That's not a judgment. That is a fact. We will help you tomorrow morning. I will make sure of it." "You have my word." "My word," Anton said, and spat it like it was a bad taste. I could feel Luis shift next to me, ready, and I could feel my own heart like a fist unclenching. It would be nothing. It would be something. It would be the kind of moment that teeters and then falls one way or another depending on the smallest shift, like a pebble loosening on a hill. I stepped forward a fraction, tightened my voice a hair. "We're leaving," I said, low and firm. "Move." Daniel went. Anton let him. The alarm cut away a minute later and the room returned to normal because people want to return to normal as soon as they can. We got Daniel back in the car. His hands were steady. Mine were not, though no one would have guessed it. He looked at me and then down at my hands, and something in his face softened like a candle he kept in a drawer lit itself. "You're injured," he said, even though I wasn't, even though I had just gripped a railing too hard and left a red line across the meat of my palm. "I'll live," I said. "Don't say that like it's enough," he said. He took my hand. He did it in the way you take the hand of a person who helps you off an ice patch, casual and gentle. But his thumb pressed against the line, and something in me went quiet. It was the quiet you get on the first morning of snow. It was not a quiet I was used to. "I want you safe," he said, and there was more in those words than we were allowed to touch. He let go, and the air pressed against my skin like a shirt in summer. That week, the blue sedan appeared again. This time, we were ready. I had asked a friend at the department to run it, and he had told me it hadn't been reported stolen. The plates came back to a rental company that didn't have a person by that name on the day in question. That meant false plates, or a friend, or paperwork that would unravel if you tugged. We tugged. We set up a day with a decoy route and a second car. When the sedan followed the decoy, I knew what we had. It was a person with time and nothing to do with it but this. That made them dangerous in the particular way idle anger is dangerous. Action, in that case, was my job. But it wasn't the car that wound me up at night. It was the way Daniel's hand had held mine. It was the way he looked at me sometimes, like we had already met somewhere else in a life we had chosen differently. He didn't flirt with me. He didn't cross lines. He treated me with the kind of care he gave a nurse in the clinic or a patient's father who had not slept in a week. He offered me coffee in the morning and tea at night and made sure I had breakfast when we left the house too early. He asked me if I slept well even when he hadn't. He said my name like he understood it was me, not just my job, standing next to him. One evening, a storm swept in off the water and the streetlights wore halos. He was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, music low. The song was something old and easy, Frank Sinatra singing about the moon the way only Sinatra can. He was stirring a pot and tasting and changing his mind about salt and tasting again. He looked domestic and not like the kitchen was lucky he liked it. He glanced up when I came in from the hallway where I had checked a repaired sensor. "Hungry?" he asked. "I can eat," I said, which is the language men like me use when we mean yes because we were raised to pretend want is negotiable. He plated something that tasted like both memory and invention. Garlic and tomatoes that had been domesticated, pasta that was neither too soft nor too hard, small green leaves that made the whole thing taste like a secret. I was leaning in the doorway the way men do when we are trying to be both useful and not in the way. He looked at me for a long moment as if he could read over me like a book he had left in a drawer 18 years ago. It isn't. Easy to talk about how you're doing when you make your living looking sturdy, he said quietly. But if you were not sleeping, I would want to know. If you were lonely, I would want to know. I'm fine, I said, and the word got stuck in my throat like a pill. He didn't push. He stirred, then cut the flame, and the room came down a notch on some invisible dimmer. He walked closer and handed me a plate. "Well," he said, his voice like a porch light, "in case you ever need reminding, you are not alone here. Even when you are working," I took the plate. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing. It was everything. We were careful. We did not talk about the way our eyes lingered. We did not talk about the way a silence between us felt like a cord stretched across a room that we both liked touching. We did not talk about how a joke landed differently when you want to know what a man's laugh feels like against your chest. We did the work. We adjusted the route for the next day. We briefed the office on a protocol we hoped they would never use. We added soft light to the stairs outside because darkness is where bad guesses go to hatch. I did not think I would tell him, and I did not think he would tell me. There are people you admire from a respectful distance and keep the admiration in its place. There are a very few, who make you want to push the furniture aside and put your heart on the floor like a rug and sit down on it together. It happened on a Sunday. The city had a way of resting on Sunday if you were willing to stop and feel it. He didn't have any public events, just a meeting with the board chair at his house, and a plan to visit his mother in the afternoon. Sunday is a day when you can breathe, unless it isn't. The board chair stayed too long and said the phrases people say when they are trying to be complimentary and control you at the same time. After she left, he stood by the window and looked out at a tree that had been there before the city understood itself. I stood a few feet back and watched the street, the low winter light, the way the air seemed to hold its breath. "Have you ever been in love?" he asked without turning. I should have said something else. I should have asked about the schedule. I should have used the old tools that keep the line between work and whatever else clean. But I have always been too honest when someone asks the right question in the right tone. Once I said, "Long ago, it did not end kind. What about you?" He took his time. "Twice," he said. Once when I was too young to understand what I was promising. Once when I was old enough to know better and said yes anyway. The second ended quiet. We didn't hurt each other on purpose. We just couldn't carry it to the same place. I nodded. The radiator hissed because old houses add their own commentary. "You are a romantic," I said. "I am," he said. "It is sometimes inconvenient. It is mostly stubbornness. I believe people can be exactly who they are and still be loved. I believe in showing up. I believe you can tell the truth, and the people who are meant to sit with you will stay seated." "That is a good belief," I said. "The problem," he said softly, still looking out the window, "is when the truth does not fit the role you are playing. I felt my whole body go attentive. Not tense, attentive, the way you lean toward a song you need to hear the words to. What role is that? He turned then. He didn't come closer. He didn't have to. He looked at me like the city was quiet and the room was a church. The one where I am your employer, he said. And you are the man who keeps me safe. And we both know there is something else standing here with us. And we both know we cannot touch it without changing the shape of everything. The room was too small for a long silence, but we made one anyway. I put my hands in my pockets. I took them out again. I looked at the floor and then at him and then away. I could not pretend to be surprised. All that was left was to respect it. You are not wrong, I said. I do not want to be unfair to you, he said. You are not, I said. I do not want to risk your livelihood, he said. You are not, I said. And then I stopped and breathed like a man who had been holding it for a while. If I'm being honest, I've been building a little fence around something this whole time. I think maybe you have too. The thing about fences is you build a gate sooner or later. He laughed, quiet and grateful. He put a hand against the window frame like he needed something solid to lean on. We could say nothing, he said. We could, I said. We could say nothing and keep doing this job and live with the knowledge like warm coals we keep under the sink. And, he said, so gently that the word felt like a fragile plate, we could say something and then act like men who understand how to handle it with care. Something in me gave. Not a giving up, a giving in, the kind that feels like relief. If we said something, I said slowly, we would need to do it right. I would need to bring in another person to handle your day-to-day. I could move to planning. I could lead the team without being at your elbow. I would not let both my heart and my hands be the thing that stands between you and danger at the same time. That is not fair to you. It is also not fair to me. I can afford to do it right, he said. And I would rather do it right than try to be clever and end up hurting the very person I want to keep from harm. We stood there with the truth out in the room like a clock that had always ticked in the background. I stepped closer. He did not step back. We were two grown men, a little weathered, a little stubborn, both of us old enough to know what we were doing, both of us careful enough to do it kindly. I raised my hand to his face, then stopped, a hair's breadth away. May I asked. You may, he said. I touched his cheek. That was all. My thumb along the line of grief that softened when he smiled. His breath caught, and mine did too, and we stayed like that for a long time. It was a kind of kissing without our mouths. It said everything and took nothing we weren't ready to give. We did not make grand promises that day. We set a plan. That is how you love well when you are people like us. We hired a senior agent I trusted named Janine to take over his immediate detail. I moved to director, which meant I was in the room when decisions got made, but not at his shoulder when a stranger grabbed him in a hallway. We declared our conflict of interest to the board with more honesty than they expected and less drama than they feared. He told his mother. I told mine. We did not go public. Not at first. We did what you would call dating, which had to bend itself around schedules and public knowledge. We walked early in the morning before the city woke and late at night when only the windows glowed. We sat on his stoop, a thing that would have made me itch a year ago and now felt like proof that safety is not only metal and locks. It is also knowing who you are sitting with. He cooked me dinner that tasted like love, and I made him eggs that tasted like the kind of ordinary that becomes holy when you are old enough to know morning isn't promised. He talked about his sister, and I talked about the way war leaves you with a permanent echo, and we didn't try to fix each other. We made a place where the echoes could die down. We had our first real argument in the grocery store because love finds its own theaters. He wanted to go himself and pick his oranges. I wanted to do a smooth in and out. He didn't understand why one aisle over the cereal boxes looked like a trap to me while the freezer section felt like a relief. I didn't understand why he needed to stop and do that small human thing when we could pay someone to do it safer. We both raised our voices more than we should have. An older woman smiled at us with the kindly resignation of someone who has watched men fight about less and survive. Pick your battles, boys, she said as she put her milk in her cart. And don't do it in front of the bananas. We laughed then, the kind of laugh that stands you both down at once. He reached for my hand without thinking. I let him take it for 3 steps before I remembered that hands are the kind of public thing that change the story. He remembered at the same time and released it like it was hot. It hurt in that small way good things do when you don't want to let go. "I'm not ashamed," he said later in the car, so quietly it felt like an oath. "I don't want to hide you." "You don't have to hide me," I said. "We are moving slow because we have to." That is not the same as hiding. It is the same as growing something worth keeping. He put his hand on my knee and left it there a second longer than casual. "You always know how to say what I needed to hear 5 minutes ago," he said. "That's the job," I said. He glanced at me and then away, and I added softer. "And the joy." We didn't get to keep it private. I don't know if you ever do when the world has its eyes on you. A blogger who had nothing better to do than sit outside building entrances caught us one early evening when we were 2 steps too slow with caution. It wasn't a kiss. It was him reaching for me, the way you reach when a word does not finish in time. But the picture looked like something that would sell for 1,000 clicks. The blog called it a scandal because scandal sells better than tenderness. The paper the day after called it an open question. Supporters wrote to say they didn't mind. Haters wrote to say they did. The board chair called a meeting. The clinics went on because clinics go on as long as there are hands to hold them up. He looked tired the day after the headline. He looked like a man who does not like to be made into a story against his will. He had his suit jacket off and his tie on the table, and his hair had that beautiful, undisciplined look it got when he ran his hand through it without thinking. "If this costs the foundation money," he said quietly, "if it costs credibility, if it costs us reach, I will end it. Not because I want to, because I cannot be selfish with other people's lives." I stood with my back against the wall and listened. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is not give advice. "I will not let them lie about you," I said after a minute. "They're not lying," he said, and he smiled in a way that made his face look like both a map and a destination. "I am a man in love with the man he hired to keep him safe. That is a simple truth. It is also not simple. I would resign," I said. "If you asked me to, I would walk away from the job and keep you. That is also a simple truth. But the thing is, everyone here is better off with the current team than without it. If I left, we would replace me. We would train someone new, and we would lose things we have built that make you safer today. I am not saying I am irreplaceable, no one is. I am saying a solution that feels moral but makes you less safe is not a solution. I'm saying let's be wise." "Damn," he said softly, and he laughed. Not because he found it funny, because you laugh when the tight thing in your chest loosens. He looked up at me. "How did I get lucky enough to find someone who speaks both languages?" "Duty and love," I shrugged. "Took me a few decades," I said. "We went to the board meeting together." He held my hand under the table, then did not. He asked them to breathe before they spoke. He told the truth. "We did this as thoughtfully as we could," he said. "We changed roles, we put in guardrails, we told you the minute it could impact your world. If the foundation needs me to step away, we will plan that. If the foundation can carry this without collapsing, I ask you to try. People are watching to see if what we say about dignity and second chances is real. It fails the test if we only apply it to strangers and not to the people we work with." They did not like being taught with their own language. No one does. But they listened, because they knew he was right. My favorite part of any meeting is when the person who you thought would be the toughest smiles a little and shifts in their chair. That means you've moved something. The board, to their credit, asked questions that were less about salacious details and more about workflow. We answered them. They voted to release a statement that said we had followed best practices and the work of the foundation would proceed. We got out of the room with a barely visible bruise. It feels like victory when you only get a bruise. The city did what cities do. It forgot, not all of it, not the parts that like to collect pictures of other people's hearts, but enough that we could walk and talk and plan. He took me to meet his mother, who had a rosary on the end table and a deep, skeptical love. She looked me up and down and said, "Do you know how to make cornbread without a recipe?" I said I did, and she didn't ask for proof, but wanted to anyway. She gave me a hug that was warmer than the oven and whispered, "If you hurt him, I will drive myself to your house and kick your shins." "I understand," I said, and she held me a second longer and then laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Acceptance is sometimes an invitation with a warning note attached. I took both. We built a life in increments. He kissed me on the back steps one night after the kind of long day that makes you forget to breathe for hours at a time. It was the kind of kiss that does not aim to impress. It aims to reassure. His mouth was warm and steady and tasted like mint and tomato sauce and a whole day's worth of trying. I held his face and kissed him back and did not count the seconds because I am not in the habit of keeping track of grace. We traded stories you keep in the quiet places. His first crush on a boy in high school who drew comics and didn't know how to look you in the eye. My first time I went to a bar where the lights were low, and I felt like I had found a country I understood. We talked about late fatherhood and whether or not we wanted to try, and we were old enough to say yes and no, and maybe with equal courage. The car with the dented fender turned out to be a man who had a brother at one of the clinics and thought Daniel was the reason the brother got turned away one afternoon. The man went to court. A restraining order was issued. You never get to stop being careful, but sometimes you get to have boundaries recognized on paper. The emails stopped when we found the IP address belonged to a kid in a dorm who had turned boredom into mischief and then mischief into cruelty because he was too young to understand the weight of words. He wrote an apology. It wasn't good, but you could tell he would understand something one day. And maybe this would help. We took a weekend in the Berkshires in the spring, when the trees were thinking about leaves but hadn't committed. We stayed in a small inn that had quilts that didn't match and a window that stuck until you nudged it with your hip just so. We put our phones face down and remembered that being together is not only about talking. It is about the way he takes off his glasses when he reads and rubs the bridge of his nose and looks at you over the top with eyes that have learned you already. It is about the way his hand knows where to find my waist when we cross streets. It is about the way I know how he likes his coffee and the way he lets me carry my silence without asking me to explain it every time. We kept loving each other in the small ways because the world is built of them. There was a night when I woke from a bad dream and he did not ask what it was. He just put his hand on my back, big and warm, and held it there until the echo quieted down. There was a morning when he was about to go on the radio and he smiled too bright and I knew he was anxious and I said, "You know how to do this. Just talk to the person in front of you and not the whole world." And he exhaled like I had reminded his lungs they were not alone. We cooked soups that tasted like home. We bought a plant and kept it alive. We built routines and then broke them when they started to feel like fences. I always thought vows were made with rings and words in front of people wearing good shoes. But I learned we say them all the time without the ceremony. You say them when you show up at the clinic on a Saturday because the waiting room is full. You say them when you fix the old shade in the bedroom because light is a kindness. You say them when you put your hand on a man's shirt while he sleeps, and you study his breathing like a prayer you never learned out loud. One evening, a year into us, we went to a community center to talk with a group of parents who were learning how to have different conversations with their teens. It was a thing he did because that is who he is, and it was a thing I did because supporting him was now a part of my days that felt like my own. The room had chairs that squeaked, and the coffee was strong and tasted like determination. He talked about his sister, and there was a moment when his voice looked like it might break. He looked over at me without moving his head, because that is the thing you can do when you love someone. You can find them without making a fuss. I moved my hand just enough for him to see it. He kept going. That night after we walked in the parking lot, the sky was that pale purple it gets before night, where you can almost see the stars if you pretend hard enough. "I have been thinking," he said, and there was mischief in it, which always made me happy. "That is usually trouble," I said. "It is," he said. "I want to dance with you, properly. Not the kind of dancing where we pretend to trip in the kitchen and laugh and call it a day. I want to take you somewhere with a band in the corner and an old floor that has grooves from 80 years of sweethearts scuffing it. I want to put my hand right here," he said, and he put it on my hip, and even in the twilight the gesture felt warm. "And I want to say, 'May I have this dance?' And I want you to say yes so loud people remember it without knowing why." I laughed. It floated over the cars like a small joy that had done hard things and learned to be light again. "Then let's go find that floor," I said. We did. There's a place on the water in a town that still pretends it is shy about how beautiful it is. On Friday nights, an old man plays trumpet and a woman who never learned to be afraid of her voice sings standards. People drink club soda and swing a little. We went there and stood in the doorway like two people who had decided a long time ago not to pretend they wanted less than they did. He held out his hand. I took it. We moved like the music was a rope someone had tied between us and we could pull ourselves along it hand over hand together. He led, and I let him, and I led, and he let me. And it felt like we had been practicing our whole lives. People glanced. Then they smiled. One man raised his glass in that universal salute to something that makes you remember you once had a heart, and it didn't always feel like a chore to keep it beating. He kissed me at the end of the song. A little bow, a little homecoming, and the room clapped softly because sometimes strangers are kind for free. The trumpet player grinned at us and played a little flourish like a benediction. We went home and the city felt like a place where people mind their own business and let you be happy in peace as long as you don't block traffic. Months passed in the way. They do when you stop counting because you are busy living. We had bad days, of course we did. We had one week where we barely saw each other and I started to get sharp edges I didn't like, and he started to talk in short sentences that meant the calendar was winning. We corrected course. That's what grown-ups do in love. You notice that the boat has drifted and you choose the shore again. We made dinner and turned off our phones. We put on an old movie with dialogue that snapped and reminded us that words could be a game and not a weapon. We fell asleep with my hand on his chest, and the rise and fall of him was enough to convince me that the world was not a mistake. There was a day when I got a call no one wants. My mother had fallen. It wasn't catastrophic. It was life. Bones are not what they used to be, and she had a hip that wanted more attention than it got. I said I would fly to Florida. I packed a small bag. He packed one too. He didn't ask. He looked at me and said, "We go." And I let him, because love means you say yes when your first instinct is to say I can handle it. He met my mother, and she loved him the way a Southern woman loves a man who remembers to ask if she needs water and then brings it without being told. He sat with me in the quiet hospital room. He put his hand over mine. People walked by and didn't look twice. We were just two men in chairs doing the long, small work of showing up for family. On the flight back, he fell asleep on my shoulder, and I looked out the window at a sky that was trying to decide whether it wanted to be afternoon or evening. I thought about how I had started this story by listing my duties. I thought about how my heart had its own list and how surprising it was that it matched so cleanly with the job I had thought was all logistics and no feeling. Protecting a man like him was never just about doors and cameras. It had always been about his dignity, his joy, his stubborn hope. It had always been about guarding the part of him that made the work worth doing. Somewhere on that plane, 30,000 feet over a darkness that looked like an ocean, I closed my eyes and let that lesson settle. We had one more test before we let ourselves believe that the life we were making was not going to be stolen. There was a break-in, 2 in the morning. The alarm did what it should, and the lights went on in stages that kept our eyes from burning. Janine moved like the pro she is. I moved that way too, but in the background because that is where I belonged now in those moments. We had the right locks and the right camera angles and the right plan, and it turns out that right plans work when the people in them believe in each other. The intruder was a kid again. So many of them are. A teenager whose cousin had told him there would be computers worth money in the house because that is what people imagine when they see a brownstone that looks like it reads the paper. It was awful and ordinary at once. The cops did their job. The kid cried. Daniel watched from a place where he could see without being seen, and then sat down at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands for a minute. I made him tea he did not drink. I put my hand on his back the way he does for me. He breathed. He lifted his head. He looked at me with that gaze that had changed the shape of my days. "I don't want to live afraid," he said. "I know enough to respect danger. I don't want it to be the only thing I respect. That's why I'm here," I said. And the words were deep in me, their roots strong. "So you don't have to carry it alone." He nodded. He let a long silence sit like a companion between us. "You were angry when you couldn't be the first through the door," he said. I could have denied it. He knows me too well. I was. "We will always have to balance your training with our plan," he said. I love the part of you that runs toward. I love the part that learned to stand back and trust. They both live in you. I don't need one without the other. Love, in a good relationship, puts mirrors in front of the truths you would rather look away from, and gives you time to learn your face. We got through that night, and the morning came as it always does, with the sounds of trash trucks and dogs being walked and someone somewhere practicing a trumpet badly, because talent has to be earned. He made pancakes. I cut strawberries. He put a plate in front of me, and I looked at the small stack like it was a gift from the universe. Maybe it was. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head. We were quiet. We were alive. We were lucky, and we knew it. Years have a way of teaching you when they are good to you. A year and a half after I shook his hand in a coffee shop and let him buy me a muffin, we did in fact stand in front of people wearing shoes they had shined for the occasion. It wasn't a church. It was the community room at the clinic because that felt right. The people who loved us were there. His mother wore a blue dress that matched her eyes and the rosary on the table at home. My mother sent a plant and a blessing and told me on the phone that she had a good feeling about this one, honey. We didn't make speeches that would make the evening news. We said the simple words. We promised to show up, to protect, to laugh, to let each other be wrong sometimes without making it big. We promised to let the work that brought us together teach us how to stay. He slipped a ring on my hand. I had not cried in public since I was 10 and scraped my elbow on the school steps. I cried. He did too. People clapped softly in that room and then loudly. We danced to a song that Sinatra would have recognized. We ate cake that tasted like sugar and being known. We went home and sat on the stoop. The two of us. The neighborhood hum in the air, rings catching what was left of the light. It is not a movie. It is better. It is not neat. It is truer. I wake up and make coffee. He wakes up and reads something and tells me about it and makes me think better. I traced the scar on his wrist from when he climbed a fence when he was 8 and his mother yelled so loud the cat hid. He traces the old line across my palm where a railing taught me I could be careful and still get scraped. We hold hands in the car at red lights. We argue about soup versus stew and whether the plant really needs that much water. We practice being the kind of men we needed when we were younger and didn't know how to ask. Sometimes he says, in the middle of the most ordinary moment, "Do you remember the first day?" And I smile like a fool because I do. I remember the coffee, the muffin, the way he looked at me like we had both been brave to show up. I remember the blue sedan and the emails and the alarm that wasn't, and how all of it felt like the world coming to test whether I meant what I had already promised without knowing. I remember the first time his hand found mine and how my body told me the truth before my mind would let me hear it. I ask him the same.
Do you?
I say, and he does. He remembers the way I stood so that he was behind me and then in front of me and then beside me, and how no one had done that for him with that kind of wholehearted attention and no agenda. He remembers that I said, "We'll make a plan," and that it felt like someone had told him he could rest. He remembers the first time I let him cook for me and liked it without making jokes. It is a funny thing to be hired to guard a man and end up guarding something you didn't know you had left in you. It is wild to me sometimes on a quiet night when the city is hush and the house feels like it's breathing, that I got here by saying yes to a job I thought would keep me at a useful distance. I sit with him on the back steps, the wooden ones that creak the way wood does when it is honest about age. He leans against my shoulder and I lean against his, and something in me says home without asking for permission. We go to the clinic and sign papers and talk to donors and make plans. We go to the river and watch the rowers in the early light and say almost nothing, because the city is just waking up and doesn't need our voice yet. We hold a calm line between us and the rest of the world and invite people into it when we can. We live in the space where duty and love are not enemies. We were careful. We were brave. We chose each other and kept choosing. He hired me to keep him safe. I did. He hired me to organize his days and protect his nights. I did that too. Somewhere along the way, we realized safety is not only locks and manners and knowing when to turn left. Safety is the knowledge that the person next to you will not vanish when things get complicated, that they will hold the line with you even when the news comes and the neighbors talk and the board has questions and the kitchen pipes rattle and the day is longer than you meant it to be. When I tell this story, and sometimes I do, to friends who want to hear something true and gentle, I always end it the same way. I say he hired me as his bodyguard. I became his boyfriend. Then I became his partner. Then I became his husband. But the real title I wear with the most care is the one we don't say as often. I am the person who stands beside him when the world is loud and makes it quiet enough for him to keep doing the work only he can do. He is the person who sets a place at the table and makes sure there is a chair with my name on it when I am too tired to ask. We kept the city outside the door just enough, and we let the world in when it mattered. We made a home inside ourselves and then built one around us. The last time the blue sedan passed us, months later, it didn't make my heart jump. It was a different car, different dent, different driver, and my brain listed the facts and let them go. I took his hand at the light and kissed his knuckles because you don't live forever, and you ought to use your moments well. He looked at me and the light turned green, and eventually we drove on. When we got home, his mother called to ask about the plant and whether we needed anything from the store. I told her we needed cornbread, and she said she would bring some next week and that she did not trust my baking, although she appreciated the effort. He laughed, and I did too, and the night slid around us like a coat you keep by the door. I still checked the locks. I will always check the locks. He still cooks too much food and invites people over before I have had time to mentally prepare, and I love him for it. We go to bed with the window cracked even when it's a little cold because it makes the sheets feel more welcome. We say goodnight like a promise. We say good morning like an answer. And when he reaches for me in the dark, I still sometimes think to myself, with a kind of wonder I hope I never lose, that the safest place I ever found turned out to be a pair of hands that reached back.